I'll go fast. Okay, so this presentation is exploring the influences and trends of interior design throughout the 1800s and 1940s. And many of the trends and things that you see in this presentation, you'll actually be able to start to pinpoint in your home. So as we go through, if you know the year that your home was actually built, take a look and see what features may still be there that are left over from that era. So let's start by defining what the different period styles are throughout the decades. So the Victorian era actually begins and ends with the reign of Queen Victoria. She was a stylistic icon of her time, and her sense of fashion, as well as the Industrial Revolution, is what started this beautiful period of interiors. So Victorian palettes were extravagant with deep colors, pattern on pattern. It was all pattern on pattern was common, mixing several types of florals and colors of deep jewel tones. Walls were lined with multiple framed pieces of art layered on top of each other. Trinkets topped every surface. These mass collections of items were made possible because of the Industrial Revolution. Many items were now mass produced, bought in catalogs, and the more you had in your home, the more prominent you were perceived as. And this period lasted from 1837 to 1914. And homes in this style are often referred to as gingerbread houses, and you can tell by the added amounts of ornamentation, shingles, and corbels that they were easily created thanks to the new and cheaper manufacturing processes. So now in the middle of this century, two other aesthetic styles emerged. Around 1901, the Edwardian style became popular. You can consider this movement as the Marie Kondo movement of the Victorian age. Those who preferred this style were sick of all the stuff. The ornamentation, the details, the pattern on pattern, the excessive carding and deep textures all had to go. What they wanted was a more simple and clean home. Crown moldings were removed, no more medallions, and brighter and lighter fabrics and wallpapers were chosen. And they took down all or many of the photos hanging on the walls. So now at the exact same time, the arts and craft movement appeared. And those who preferred this style were responding negatively to the Industrial Revolution. They didn't want mass-produced items. They wanted furniture and fittings that were handmade and came from the heart of an artisan. Oftentimes, these styles were seen in bungalow or craftsman-style homes that were made popular by Frank Lloyd Wright and others in the Prairie House movement. Homes were more simple with natural woods, beautiful joinery, and a lot more purposeful. Sometimes furniture was handmade just to fit the space that it was in. And all these styles ended about the same time. And modernism, which is comprised of many of the styles such as Art Deco and mid-century, began to take over completely. This movement was really a design aesthetic based around electricity and the new modern conveniences that entered the home. And the wonders of the, what was that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So where would something like Art Nouveau fit on this?
That would be in the modernism. Actually, it's kind of like here.
It overlapped the arts and crafts a bit?
It started a little bit sooner, like I think in Europe, and then it didn't hit quite as hard here. It was more for the rich people, but I think maybe I have that. There we go. Oops, I went back. Yeah, so it's kind of like right here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not good with my clicking. So then also the Spanish Revival movement came in, and what we see in this style is a response to the World's Fair in Pasadena, and that distinctive architectural style was seen there. And because more people were traveling across the United States, they began to fall in love with the charming casual style of Spanish Revival. So now let's take a look at how these styles incorporated into the architectural aesthetic of Denver and maybe even your own home. So as we know, design trends tend to start in the East and they move west. However, there are some distinctive styles that develop in their own specific regions. Denver began in 1859, and we can see that almost from the beginning of Denver's history, they fell in love with the Victorian style as well. So between 1870 and 1900, a good majority of the homes built in Denver were Victorian style. This is also due to the multi-generational living that the Victorian houses were known for. Because of the silver panic in 1893, the large, elaborate Victorians were just too expensive to build and manage. Smaller, more single-family homes began to be built in Denver, and they were built in a more modest Victorian style, but still had different elements of the Victorian categories like Queen Anne, Italianate, and Edwardian. The Edwardian interiors really dominated the period between 1901 and 1918. And in 1910, we start to see the bungalows being built heavily in neighborhoods throughout Denver. The arts and crafts interiors were dominant for about 20 years until the 1930s, when the Spanish Revival and Modernism styles really started to take over. The Spanish Revival styles were common, of course, in Denver due to the Native American and Hispanic influences, but the style's popularity was short-lived and only lasted about 20 years. So you can kind of see where and how it overlaps here, which is pretty interesting. But let's also start with the bones of the house. In most homes, the dominant construction material was lath and plaster. And lath and plaster was a modernized form of construction that began in the UK, which was called wattle and daub, and it was consisting of clay, manure, and hay. And as Americans and Canadians expanded west, sawmills were not always available to create neatly planed boards, and the first crop of buildings in any new western or northern settlement would be put up with split beam lath. But lath and plaster was still used up until the 1960s, when gypsum board took off. So then next was Beaver Board and Upson board. And they were all a precursor to wallboard. It was made of thick wood fiber, and J.P. Lewis in 1903, he was a paper maker, and he glued layers of mat board used for picture framing to make boards for lining his attic. Later, wallboards were made of layered wood fibers, and these products were advertised as inexpensive, light, easily handled, and installed as compared to the process of plastering over lath. And it was also advertised as having insulating qualities. And one advertisement from the 1920s claimed that when used in chicken houses, the hens will lay more eggs in winter. So then wallboard was the next step towards what we know today as sheetrock. It was comprised of layers of cardboard and fiberboard cemented with asphalt. Wallboard was the go-to product advertised in catalogs and used in kit homes. Gypsum board or sheetrock began by layering plaster within 4 layers of wool felt paper. And as we know, wool is inherently fire retardant. And then in 1910, the Gypsum Corporation bought the Sackett Plasterboard Company, and by 1970 introduced what we know as sheetrock today. So if you've ever torn apart your walls and you're like, what the heck is this made of? You can kind of look back at the generations here and see what it is. So for example, mine is made of this wallboard, and I always wondered why my walls were made of cardboard, but really it was this wallboard material. So around the turn of the century, fireproofing your home became a big concern. In Denver in particular, fireproofing became a big issue because a fire broke out sometime in the early morning hours of April 19th, 1863, starting at the back of the Cherokee House Saloon and Hotel at 15th and Blake. By the time Denver residents woke up that morning, the fire had destroyed more than 70 buildings. There were no reports of deaths with the fire. And at the time, most of the buildings in Denver were built out of resin-rich pine, making them especially susceptible to fire. In response to the disaster, Denver enacted a new ordinance referred to as the Brick Ordinance that required buildings to be constructed out of fire-resistant materials like brick or stone. And in many historic buildings, lath and plaster ceilings are credited with a major role in the prevention of fire spread. They were critical to the protection of the horizontal elements, such as timber joisted floors. Finding a fire-safe alternative to plaster would be difficult, but leave it to the kit house manufacturers to revolutionize the fireproofing on homes. They added a plaster core with cardboard outside and began to market it as resistant to fire, and saying only the outer cardboard layer burns. And these sheet goods made it very easy to build a home and be wallpaper ready. So let's look at the 1880s. So the Victorian home decorating palette was actually quite sophisticated, with an emphasis on tertiary colors. And tertiary colors are those created by mixing equal parts of primary and secondary colors. The dark colors that are usually associated with Victorian decor are more the result of poor lighting than of color choice. In early Victorian homes, lighter colored walls and richer colors in the dining room were in the dining room in the library. And later Victorians returned to deeper tones, which were used to emphasize the importance of a room. But in more urban areas, colors like gray, dark green, and gray blue were often chosen to minimize the effect of grime and soot from coal dust and stains from gas and oil lamps. Victorian colors are warm and subdued and usually include soft colors on gray or cream backgrounds. Deep rich tones and dusty hues like ashes of rose and a subdued shade of lavender were common. The colors were chosen by individual homeowners also reflected the organic pigments that were available and what the local merchant had in stock. The brighter shades of white we have today were not available as a paint color in the 1800s and were not seen in any home prior to that era. And the Victorians loved pattern and used it lavishly throughout their homes. Complex patterns covered every surface, from multiple wallpapers that covered the walls and ceilings to luxurious fabrics trimmed with tassels and embroideries, as well as intricately woven Oriental and Persian rugs. Depending on the tastes and talents of the residents, results ranged from a mismatch bordering on horrendous to a skillfully created, balanced, and pleasing environment. And although it may look excessive to the modern eye, as it did also to some towards the end of the 1800s, Victorian style is nonetheless a very comfortable decorating style, creating a welcoming ambiance that is cozy and romantic. Some favorite patterns range from flora and fauna to geometrics, stripes, damask, and intricate combinations of those. And at the time, large luxurious mansions were built to house multiple generations of families. The Victorian and Romanesque style of homes were typically built for the wealthy, and the wealthy would have staff to help them with the house. We see here the start of a modern day kitchen. Now, we would not see kitchens like this in any modest single family homes. These types of kitchens were for the wealthy, and it would be room for the maids and cooks only. It was common to have the kitchen in the basement or a corner of the home away from the family. Laundry and cooking may have been done in the same room as well. In smaller, more quaint homes, the stove was positioned near the center of the house and it allowed heat to radiate throughout. The stove itself was used for cooking as well. And towards the end of the 1890s, we start to see a shift from the kitchen being in the basement with the laundry to the main living floors. And bathrooms ranged from primitive to state-of-the-art. Many homes started with, I guess, what you would consider today as a compostable toilet. Plans here from Chappell's plan book on how to properly create an earth closet with a valve that would allow the droppings of the used earth to a vault below and a door for filling with new earth. The second image is of a gravity-fed toilet, which would have started to become more common in homes. So I love this painting on the left of a group of ladies in the late Victorian parlor. If perhaps our meeting today was in the 1890s, we would have been sharing history not on Zoom or a computer, but sitting around a table just like this in a parlor chatting away and referencing what we learned from the new books we read and acquired for our personal libraries. And as I mentioned before, excessive can be considered synonymous with Victorian interiors. The upper class flaunted their wealth, and those who aspired to their status found ways to mimic it. If one could not afford fine woods to panel walls and marble fireplaces for public rooms like the dining room and parlor, less expensive materials would be painted to imitate them. Mass products helped make the look available to the middle class via heavy textured wall coverings like Lincrusta, Anaglypta, and Fool the Eye wallpapers. Furniture and accessories were elaborate and ranged from delicate to massive. Restraint was not part of the Victorian interior decorating. And all these images here are from homes in Denver. A photo here is a more modest but still upper class Victorian home. You can see the heater central in the room here. And what is rare is when you get to see a perfectly preserved Victorian interior. You can see the wallpaper on both the walls, above the picture rail, and on the ceiling. Sometimes the ceiling would not be wallpaper, but for those who could afford it, it was a hand-painted design to match the adjacent border of the wall covering. It's also a treat when we can find images of middle-class homes. You can see in this bedroom the way this person chose to mimic the Victorian style, but on more of a budget. Wallpapers on the walls and ceiling, layered with wrap drapery is seen, and of course, it's hard to ignore the multitudes of layers of paintings, lace, clocks, teacups, and pillows throughout the room. But as we edge towards the 1900s, more simpler design aesthetics were preferred. People began to remove the photos and tchotchkes, and you can see here a more romantic and simple version of the bedroom you saw before. This photo was taken from an upper middle class home. And kitchens still during this time were not glamorous. They definitely were not the selling feature of a home. And as mentioned before, many kitchens were in the basement and the staff was kept away from the upper floors while preparing. The heat from the stove still provided the heat through the house. These two pictures show a basement kitchen, and in contrast, a more modern kitchen on an upper floor. Still, in both pictures, you can see a massive bucket of potatoes ready to be peeled. Luckily for the picture on the right, the kitchen staff has a nice table to sit on and peel potatoes at, unlike the gentleman on the left who only has his lap. And bathrooms really started to evolve from this point on. You see in the first image a metal tub dressed up with a beautiful marble sink. The bathrooms were often decorated exactly the same as other rooms in the house. The sanitary reform movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s urged citizens to opt for items that would not collect dust, which they believed to harbor disease-carrying microorganisms. Wood and carpeting were soon replaced with porcelain tile and linoleum, and these surfaces soon became highly sought after in areas of cooking, laundry, bathroom, and healthcare. Hospitals, in particular, opted for white subway tile in order to be able to quickly spot any dirt and wipe it clean with ease. White subway tiles have been a part of our collective consciousness for a long time, carrying the connotation of cleanliness. And wall-to-wall carpet was at its cheapest because of so many advances in the technology of weaving. However, the critics and domestic reformers had thrown it under the bus. Oriental rugs were the new carpet, rugs made by the hand of a craftsman, not machines. So Eastlake, Morris, and their American counterparts were adamant on this principle, but the majority of Americans, i.e. those that are not rich, stuck with their machine-made carpets and rugs. The only thing that changed was the popularity of Eastern style geometrics, replacing the fad for fruits and flowers and foliage. Around the mid-century, carpets were revealed as carriers of dirt and filth from outside the home and very liable to putrefy when subject to damp and warmth. In the space of a few years, the trend shifted from wall-to-wall carpet to hardwood floors and exotic carpets from the Orient, a trend which would carry well into the next century. And unfortunately for home buyers not buying new homes, it left them with now inferior and outdated softwood floors. So what to do? The critics advocated to lay down parquet. So for many homeowners, wood carpeting was the way to go. Wood carpeting was thinner than regular parquet and was composed of strips of hardwood about 1/4 of an inch thick, glued to heavy muslin backing. It could be installed right on top of the existing flooring. And during the 1880s, the Decorative Wood Carpet Company of Warren, Ohio, carried over 50 patterns. The carpet could also be used as wainscoting, and the company made a floor medallion with borders. The price was competitive with that of Brussels and other carpets at around $1.75 a linear yard. Painting was also an option, but now instead of trying to faux paint carpet, the critics advocated stains and paint that mimicked inlaid woods or better grades of wood. Tile, especially in hallways and entryways, was also more popular than ever, especially with the popularity of Minton tiles gaining strength. And by the last decade of the 19th century and well into the 20th century, hardwood floors became the norm for all new construction. Plain strips of tongue-and-groove flooring, usually in oak, was now common throughout custom-made and spec homes. Most parlors enjoyed parquet floors, usually with a decorative border. The ornateness of the pattern and the types of wood used were dictated by the money spent. Wood carpet was still in use and extremely popular, and by the 1890s, it was 3/8 inch thick. glued to a muslin backing and nailed down with finished nails. Many homeowners today have discovered that they have this kind of parquet when too many sandings have rendered their parquet paper thin. The woodwork of the day was made to show off the natural colors and grains of wood, whether oak, walnut, mahogany, or other exotic wood. The floors would have done the same. We often think of the woodwork in the late 19th century as dark and oppressive. Often that is because we are seeing it after 100 years of old shellac and varnished dirt, wear and tear. When the detritus of a century is removed, the natural wood shines, and the same holds true on hardwood floors. So by the end of the century, wood floors were not what they were at the beginning of the century. In 1898, the Wood Mosaic Company of Rochester, New York wrote an article titled, "How to Treat a Soft Pine Floor." And they simply said, if it's very bad, use it for kindling. The article elaborated, most soft pine floors are very bad. If in fair condition, cover it with thin parquet or wood carpet. Or if it must be scrubbed and mopped like a bar room or a butcher's stall, cover it with linoleum or oilcloth. In this case, don't cover with parquetry. Don't cast pearls before swine, or maybe painted. Paint adheres well to pine. Don't cover it with a dusty, dirty, disease-disseminating carpet. So most of the floors, original floors in Wash Park, are all this soft pine wood that you see here. So the 1900s. In the 1900s, things started to shift away from the overly ornate and sometimes gaudy style of the Victorians. As mentioned before, we start to lean towards a modern Edwardian period. There are many guidebooks at this time telling the ladies how to keep their home and how to best decorate. Homes started to be built for newlyweds as the idea that they needed their own homes. With that, smaller homes with fewer rooms were built, so that meant that some rooms needed to combine purposes. For the morning room, the advice was, most families would do well if they made this room into a lounge where children can enjoy their hobbies. Line the walls with bookcases and put writing tables in the bay windows. You then have a library and a sitting room. And so this lovely photo shows all that delicate furniture and a spinning wheel, which would have been a hobby. This is wall-to-wall carpet and a mirrored fireplace. This is just a beautiful image of how the Victorian style could be both vibrant and simple at the same time. And it's always nice when you can find photos of real people living in their homes. Many magazines and sources on decorating often portray the best case scenario, the most expensive, the best design. But it's a treat when you can look at these styles and time periods, seeing how people in their own homes of modest means chose to decorate. Here we see two families in their homes. You have a nice rug, great wall covering, a few pieces of furniture, and the family's prized clocks and vases displayed on the mantle. The custom of elaborately decorating Christmas trees was actually popularized in the United States by the Victorians and epitomizes the exuberant Victorian love of opulence. So you can kind of see the start of those Christmas trees there. Here's the bedroom. So the main necessities in a modern bedroom: thorough ventilation at all hours of the day and night, fitments to do away with wardrobes and chests of drawers so that the room space and air space may not be wasted. A good position for the bed, not only away from the draft passing between window, door, and fireplace, but free from the early morning light. The foot of the bed should not face the window. Although in this image, you do see the bed facing the window. So in this photo, you can see another real example of a bedroom. They even have a photo on the back of the door. This person has tried to pare down to more Edwardian preferences, but some of their prized trinkets and photos remain. Simple lace draperies are seen instead of the heavy dark silks as the previous decade. And here you see a sweet little image of a little boy's room and an entryway to a home. I don't know about you, but the tablecloth on that shelf with the big heavy vase over the kid's bed is giving me heart palpitations. I guess children back then must have been more obedient and wouldn't try to pull that tablecloth down. I know my children sure would have, and probably would have had a big bump on their head. And the image on the right looks very similar to the staircases we see in many of the entryways in Wash Park. So black and white photos can be misleading, and it leaves us to guess what the colors might be. Some might picture modern palettes when they look at the older photos, just because that's what we're used to. The wallpapers and color choice at the time were bright, complicated, and unapologetically rich. You can see bright teals, greens, deep reds, and pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern. But let's look at how the kitchens have now developed during the 1900s. The kitchen started to become a central part of the house. Most middle-class families did not have cooks or maids, so they cooked on their own. And if they did have a cook, this was still their domain. Things are more streamlined now, and it starts to become a decorated part of the house. More advice from the Hints on House Furnishings handbook said that every kitchen should have a range and sink for preparing vegetables and washing up purposes. The floors and walls are tiled where all the necessary part of the work is done. Excuse me, dressers should be provided of ample size. I choked on my own spit. Excuse me. There should be cupboards. Sinks must be of good size and preferably white coralled porcelain. Draining boards should be of hardwood like teak, fitted with gunmetal plate bosses, screwed to plugs in the wall, and the range should be placed so that it's lit from the left side. So they're very specific. And early sinks were mounted to the walls, sometimes with attached drain boards, and often had 2 or 4 legs, like a piece of furniture. It was considered important to leave the space under the sink open to allow air to circulate and prevent moisture and decay. And from 1900 to 1920, many families were staying in smaller homes, and this meant things like the Hoosier became more important because they simply just didn't have the space. The Hoosier cabinet is considered an improved version of a baker's cabinet. A baker's cabinet is a table with 1 or more bins underneath. It has a small work surface and a shallower upper section on the top of the table that is used for storing bowls, pans, and utensils. The Hoosier cabinet evolved over the years to include more accessories and innovations that made life easier for cooks in the kitchen. They peaked in popularity in the 1920s, then declined as homes began to be constructed with built-in kitchen cabinets and countertops. Another revolutionary item was the ice box, seen here. The ice box was an insulated cabinet lined with tin or zinc, with a slot for a giant block of ice delivered weekly by the Iceman. I love this image on the right that shows the ice block being put into it. You can see the drippings of the water stained on the front, the tin to catch the water, and there's slime from foods underneath. Again, in history, you often see the idealized versions of things, but here we see a very realistic scene that was most likely common in homes. And the image on the bottom left is the Crystal Lake Ice Company delivery wagon that was here in Denver. And bathrooms began to change as well. More innovations in bathing made bathtubs, indoor plumbing, and showering more common. Tile began to appear on the walls as well as intricate tile patterns on the floor. As we know, kit houses started to make their way into common America, and they became complete with some of the first indoor plumbing and electricity. The folding bathtub on the left is an interesting invention. For those that still didn't have indoor plumbing, this upholstered toilet was an option to class up the bathroom. And for many, gas lighting was still their main mode of light. A large gas line would come through the ceiling and supply the gas fumes to light the chandeliers and sconces. And in the 1910, electricity made its way to most newly built homes. The photo on the bottom left shows a proud new owner of an electric chandelier showing off his new brightly lit room. Some didn't welcome the change. Oh, I wish you guys could hear this. It's a famous scene in Downton Abbey when she gets the chandeliers put in. And then catalogs started in the 1900s, and they would sell electrical components for light fixtures. The catalog homes again came standard with lighting, and it is said that those homes would often be the only homes with electricity on the block. Some homes that already had gas lines, you could buy a combination gas and electric chandelier as you see on the right. You may have heard of knob and tube electricity. If your home was built around this time, you still may have parts of your home with this kind of electricity. The wires are not insulated, and it's definitely a fire hazard. so just beware. And then in the 1910s, we know that the Edwardian and arts and crafts styles were dominant, and the typical Victorian styles were dying out. Typical of the time as well, some people were slower to let go of trends, while others were quick to be out with the old and in with the new. Personal preferences in design also play a role in the development of trends. So many people during this era are still holding on to the Victorian design, but they start paring it down, changing the colors, and perhaps mixing their older, more ornate furniture styles with newer, cleaner, brighter color preferences at the time. They start clearing out the tchotchkes and changing to more movable furniture that is more suitable for gatherings. And heavier drapery was replaced with thinner, more decorative pieces that didn't close off the room, but still added a decorative flair. I thought these images of a trending doorway drapery at the time is pretty interesting. And on the right, you can see similar pieces that are still in an older home today. And where people wanted to be bold, you can start to see influences of more geometric flowers that start to develop from the trends of the Art Nouveau and Art Deco periods. Still, there's wallpaper on the ceilings. And if you think about it, if you couldn't afford the beautiful molded ceiling treatments, a wallpaper that mimics that design would be a good way to go to get that look at low cost. After all, in the Victorian era, you got to fake it to make it. And faux wood grains were still a fashionable choice. And you can see here, these are some of the season's prettiest wallpapers. You may have heard that the rich green tones in wallpapers often were created using arsenic. People started dying in the UK after staying too long in rooms with this heavy green wallpaper. Luckily, they figured out the cause and changed to a different tone of green that they were able to achieve without using arsenic. And bungalow and craftsman homes of the day were more commonly decked out in arts and crafts style of interiors. However, you can still see the heavy influence of Victorian in this bungalow interior. You still have the spindly, delicate furniture and tchotchkes and the Oriental rugs covering the floors. Even the light fixtures are more Victorian than the hand-stained glass that soon became common of this style. This home, although was trendy for its architectural style, the interiors were still catching up to the trends. And as the arts and crafts styles started to take over the Victorian era, you can see older, delicate furniture being replaced with the handmade. Straight lines, thick profiles, squared off details were common versus the round and carved. Accessories were put away and hidden. Stained glass, square light fixtures replaced swirled metal and glass globes. The pattern was drastically reduced and there were more simple wallpaper, and the architecture took center stage for this style. In this image here, you see the beautiful built-in cabinetry in the dining room instead of those loose cabinets. Accessories are contained inside of that cabinet as a smaller collection. The table is large, heavy, and simplified, and rich veneers create interest rather than the carvings or marquetry. And the light fixture is one of the most notable differences. It is boxy and metal, and most likely stained glass or alabaster. The fireplace is handmade glazed tiles, and the ceilings only ornamented with a small amount of wood molding. It is simple. Painted woods have gone away, and the natural color of woods is featured. The kitchen developed a bit more too. Catalog versions of kitchens urged more cabinets and a more efficient layout. The kitchen triangle is often referred to as the ideal placement of the sink, stove, and refrigerator. And you can see that forming here with the icebox on the left, sink in the middle, and the stove opposite the refrigerator. Of course, a kitchen like this would be in a more upscale home. And more cabinets were encouraged, and those who could afford it benefited from a cleaner workspace. In normal, more modest homes, kitchens were developed slowly as the cost to renovate and invest was high, and cabinets were expensive. Most homes probably still held on to their cast iron stove, their wall-mounted sink, and if they were lucky, their Hoosier style cabinet. For many families, this stayed until the 30s or 40s when kitchen renovations became affordable due to the mass-produced cabinets as well as lines of credit. There's a few more homes of kitchens as they slowly started to expand. And the bathroom got a makeover too. Clean porcelain started to make its way into bathrooms. It was sanitary, easy to produce, and easily available in catalogs. Again, with the popularity of the Sears catalog and the kit homes, the ideal bathroom was advertised everywhere. The needle bath in the first image is an interesting start to modern day showers. And as mentioned before, the great sanitary reforms started to see white subway tiles enter the bathrooms. The image here, although it looks like a brand new bathroom, is actually a time capsule with the exception of the more modern toilet. The bathrooms were uniform, blindingly bright, and based on the Victorian era notion that germs lived in dirt. Logic then dictated that dirt would show up best against a solid white backdrop. So snowy floors and walls and fixtures made the dreaded filth easier to identify and conquer. Magazines of the day touted the importance of the hospital white bath, considered a sanitary ideal, and homemakers took pride in making these spaces gleam. And the 1920s really is considered the end of the Victorian influence design, and the arts and crafts movement takes over. And this is the majority of our neighborhood here. So as you can see, wallpaper is still on the ceiling. And in the 1920s America, interior paint styles continued to move away from the vivid tones of the previous century, and many colors popular during the decade appear muted or washed out, containing significant amounts of gray. In the bedroom, grayish blue-green is an appropriate color, or paint the walls with a lighter tone and use a deeper shade as an accent on doors and windows. So you can kind of see here, here's your wallpaper. You have a maroon purpley wall covering. Your upholstery would be green and gold, and then you'd have a lavender accent, and that would be a good color choice for that room. And then on the opposite end was the prairie style movement, which encouraged getting back to nature. And these colors were inspired by clay, dirt, trees, and tall dried grasses. And then further on the opposite end of the design spectrum, the Art Deco movement became popular, but it only would have been popular with the upper class due to the expensive exotic woods and materials. And this was the roaring 20s, out with the old and in with the new. Many people who invested in the Art Deco style would remove all of the past designs and renovate top to bottom. If you had to pick one word to describe the essence of the 20s, it would be glamorous. Industrial designs made popular by the German Bauhaus movement included furniture sculpted from steel, graphic curves, but simple silhouettes. This is the beginning of what will eventually become modern minimalism, where ornamentation is stripped away and function matters most. And Art Deco design made use of symmetrical geometric shapes, faceted forms, trapezoidal, lots of shapes inspired by Greco-Roman, Egypt, African and Aztec designs. Art Deco furniture frequently used marquetry, enameling, and other techniques to create surface entrance. The use of opulent exotic woods and materials such as stingray and zebra skin were also evident. Vivid, bold colors were used, but later subdued into a black, white, and metallic color palette that is often identified with Art Deco today. Furniture and interiors combined sleek styles and angular forms, but were often reminiscent of simplified earlier decorative styles. And another fashionable step in interiors was to remove the carpets. In their heyday, felt base and linoleum rugs were often used in bedrooms, covered porches, and attic living spaces. Sometimes they popped up in dining rooms, and you may uncover one while taking up wall-to-wall carpeting. If you're very lucky, you may discover a never-used rug still rolled up, stashed in the attic, basement, or garage. Or you may find a rug sections lining the bottom of a closet or a drawer. These are pieces of history and shouldn't be tossed in the trash. An old linoleum or felt-based rug is worth appreciating because it is unlikely this product will ever be made again. The few companies now producing real linoleum don't offer patterns, let alone rugs, and no one makes felt-based flooring anymore. The closest you can get is a floor cloth, which was a pre-linoleum technology, and these are usually custom made and not cheap. So if you have a linoleum rug, treasure it, even if your friends don't really understand. And since these products were marketed as rugs, it's no surprise that they were often printed to resemble various kinds of woven or knotted carpets. Some even printed fringe for the full effect. The most amusing of these were rugs based on traditional Oriental rugs, though they were also fake braided rugs, rag rugs, and needlepoint rugs. Straw or other fiber matting was another fashionable motif, and these rugs were way easier to keep clean than the real thing. And here's an example of how prominent this trend of linoleum rugs was. In this upper class home, there was a large square that was not parquet and was originally an inlaid carpet. This homeowner followed the trend and substituted their gross carpet for linoleum. And this was a high-end house by a well-known architect, which was built in the 1890s. So this practice was not restricted to retrofitting earlier houses and was very, very common. And then the photo on the left is an example of how these trends come back around. And we're seeing encaustic tiles inset between hardwood floors, just like what you see here. And so I bet you've seen this trend on the left at many restaurants and stores around Denver. And linoleum was very trendy and practical item and could instantly update a space. So out with those rugs and in with the modern version of a rug. Utilitarian architecture and design was the name of the game in the 1920s. And in the Roaring 20s, the kitchen was all about simplicity, all white, and most importantly, function over form. Another trend that took over were sleeping porches. Seemingly stigmatized as contaminated consumptive spaces, this sleeping porch lost enough of its pure porch association to become an element of mainstream American architecture. The popularization of mail-order sleeping porches demonstrated the widespread demand for them. Local craftsmen ensured vernacular design, but sleeping porches shared common traits. An ideal location on the second or third floor kept patients from the dampness of the ground and benefited from the perceived higher quality of air. Second floor sleeping porches were often added to existing first floor verandas. The decision of homeowners to tack on sleeping porches represented a tangible effort to embrace a hygienic lifestyle. In many houses, the sleeping porch is provided as an addition to a regular bedroom so that it could be used or not as desired. In households where there were children, such a sleeping porch is especially advantageous as part of the equipment of the owner's bedroom. The children can sleep outdoors on such a porch for the greater part of the year and still not be too far removed from the parents. Curtains at the casement windows soften the outlines of the room, and the light-colored reed furniture adds and gives it a sun parlor effect. For those homes having only one living room, the sun parlor was often used to entertain guests when serving tea or chatting informally. It was said that the sun parlor may be made attractive by the use of ferns, flower boxes, or even a standing bird cage. So in the heyday of the sleeping porch faded with the advent of air conditioning and the effective drug treatment of tuberculosis. Yet the sleeping porches dotted the American landscape hint at a period in American culture where climate, medical knowledge, and health-inspired architecture converge. And you will see a lot of these in Denver. So the decade of the 1930s was tough for many Americans dealing with the Great Depression. But despite the economic downturn, many homemakers did what they had always done: take care of their homes. There were rugs to beat, biscuits to make, and curtains to sew. And styles here show the range of designs in the 1930s. And modern design caught up with the middle-class housewives. So streamlined modern is what they wanted most. Nesting is never more important than when times are tough. Resourcefully, thrifty homemakers were able to turn many a sow's ear into silk purses. Note the change in styles from the traditional to the modern as the decade progressed. And though the 1920s are often called roaring, the 1930s are marked by a design revolution. Brick and brass fireplaces, chrome wall sconces with milk glass shades, metal pole lamps with beaded fringe, and small round mirrors added light and reflection to a 1930s living room. Curtains were large floral patterns and delicate lace sheers were commonplace. In the same decade as the world's first tea bag, electric razor and sticky tape, and the television set came on the scene. Although few living rooms would have boasted a TV, numerous families gathered around a bulky wood-cased record player or wooden floor model radio, listening to their favorite soap operas and awaiting news of the turnaround of the economy. In general, what is ubiquitous when it comes to design is that it is greatly affected by technology. And in the 1930s, radios were the main source of entertainment and were often treated like pieces of furniture. And during this period, muted pastels flowed from floor to ceiling and from wall to wall. There are a few very simple principles to lay down. If the walls are a plain color, the room will be colorless unless there is a pattern elsewhere in the room. No color scheme can be really successful that does not use 3 or more colors. Floral or striped wallpaper with any preferred hue is dominant. And a living room of the 1930s typically boasted a few unmatched pattern rugs, which may have sat in doorways, in front of fireplaces, and in the center of the room for warmth and decoration. And despite the Great Depression, designers of living room furniture from the 1930s were leaning towards the New Age, period hip Art Nouveau line. A blend of furnishings captured the day's idea of modern, which has become some of today's retro favorites. They were sleek, molded plywood and plastic chairs, long, streamlined, low-back sectional sofas, shapely wing-back chairs, cushy chaise loungers, and unusually shaped coffee tables and end tables. So actually here it is, Carolyn. So around the 1930s, Art Nouveau. And this was the era when Art Deco designs of the roaring 20s went from luxurious and pricey to lavish yet affordable, or they sat stockpiled in manufacturing warehouses. The Great Depression was obviously a very, very difficult time for most Americans, and for good reason. People were motivated to change their home interiors from a stark white and utilitarian look to something a bit more uplifting. In the 1930s, the quintessential kitchen featured a yellow and green color scheme, and more patterns started to pop up. Another scheme a 1930s kitchen typically used was a triadic red, yellow, blue color scheme with a neutral white, tan, or black background. Such a kitchen would have worked in almost any home designed from the 20s through the 30s. Also, among more wealthy individuals, the Art Deco period started to make its way into the kitchen with an emphasis on light, sleek lines and a geometric motif. While often garish looking to the 21st century eyes, these colorful spaces were the height of fashion in their day and are easier to appreciate once you understand how they came to be. The stringent norms of the bathroom were called into question, not on the grounds of cleanliness, but on the grounds of style. If the bathroom's cleanliness reflected the housewife's standard of hygiene, then its decoration or lack of it reflected her taste. And it's hard to pinpoint the exact date these things started to change. Bathrooms didn't transform overnight. It took some time for colors to take hold across the country. But what we do know, as early as 1927, companies like Kohler and Universal Sanitary Manufacturing had begun producing bathroom sinks, tubs, and toilets in vibrant colors. Folks who couldn't commit to a colored fixture could still splash it everywhere else. So you can see in this bathroom here, they didn't want the hot pink fixtures, but they went crazy on the wall. And then the first half of the decade was spent in World War II on the home front, and that meant conservation, frugality, victory gardens, rations, fundraisers, and bond drives. It was a test in patience, positivity, confidence, and emotional endurance as people lived day to day, waiting to hear the fates of their loved ones away from war. In those first 5 years of the 40s, people got used to making do, going without, and utilizing every last bit of everything. Thankfully, in 1945, the war ended and Americans adjusted once again to a new normal as they recovered from years of uncertainty. By 1948, 2.5 years after World War II ended, Americans were ready for some fresh air and some new perspectives. Dorothy Draper was the most famous interior designer at the time. Draper, after all, was a dame who specialized in firsts. Starting in 1925, when she opened the Architectural Clearinghouse, arguably the first official interior design business. And women didn't work back then, and what decorating profession there was, it wasn't much. It was mostly made up of men. And she didn't feel like decorating hotels and houses to the period styles that they were built. She wanted to do something opposite and created the modern Baroque design style. She mostly designed for hotels and commercial spaces, Baroque columns, and designed fabrics for the residential market. The designs of her residential interiors were a calmed down approach to what she would normally do in her public spaces. The 40s were a time where the social scene was flourishing and people wanted to get out and celebrate. Her designs, the punch of color and brightness all reflected that time period. And the images above show her public spaces. Some of these hotels, like the Greenbrier, have preserved her designs for all of time to capture this unique essence of her style. People came to Dorothy because she did the unexpected and had this brilliant sense of color. She took a world that was drab and dreary and made it colorful. She had a habit of painting the walls in either the darkest or most vibrant colors, out with the drab and in with the moody. She wanted everything to be theatrical. And in these photos here, you can see how much her style permeated throughout the residential design of the time. Her designs were in House Garden magazine, and she wrote multiple columns about decorating. People wanted color and excitement, and Dorothy Draper was a style icon of the 40s to 60s. And once the public decided to take the plunge into color, they went all the way, often splashing walls, floors, and fixtures with different vibrant tones. Tiles, paintings, curtains, even furniture and throw rugs all appeared in bold hues. The earliest American standard brochures to sell bathroom essentials in color featured a wheel of complementary shades behind each one, a brilliant marketing ploy to help consumers coordinate floors, walls, and accessories to match. Suggesting 4 color combinations like red, black, green, and gold, these palettes were not for the faint of heart. So you can see some examples here. And for the majority of the people in the 1940s, the kitchen would have been identical to what they had in the 1930s at best. Those who could afford it towards the end of the 1940s were treated with many options of design. Bold, primary, and vivid colors were very in during the 40s. Two-toned kitchens were also common, and many kitchens of this era used tile on the countertops, one color for the main area and a second as the border and trim. These 2 colors were seen repeated in the checkerboard on the floor, in the curtains, the appliances, and the wall art. The appliances of the 1940s were typically enameled. White was the popular choice for ovens, but other colors like blue, red, and yellow were popular. The invention of the refrigerator replaced the icebox. New ovens, microwaves, toasters, blenders, and the telephone made its way into the modern kitchen. Laminate countertops, although seen as old and awful today, were the luxury back in the day. The metal band on the front was to cover the edges, but it also helped to preserve them for future generations. If you come across a kitchen like this, admire it. It was a revolutionary design for the time. And the 40s really set the stage for the 1950s in which the kitchen and all things in houses began to create its own identity and moved fully on from the past. And so this photo here is of the new post-war suburbs of Denver. And as Denver and the world celebrated the end of World War II, the subsequent housing boom took over. Houses, furniture, and all the modern conveniences were mass-produced and available for anyone. The 1950s started to pivot a design that has never turned back, a new generation of style that is unlike the previous decades. And as I say, the rest is history. Thank you. That's it. So who has any of these designs in their home right now? Anyone have an old kitchen?
The kitchen is one of the few parts that has actually been redone. Of course, it was redone enough ago that it needs redone, because as it goes, if it had been left original, it probably would be more functional than it is now.
That's funny. Let's see. So when I was researching this too, it actually helped solve a mystery for me, because when you bought the home and we're looking at, it from the outside and roof, we kept wondering, why do we have 2 chimneys? We have 1 fireplace, 2 chimneys, and we found no evidence at all of where the second chimney or second fireplace should be. Not even in the basement. The chimney didn't even go to the basement. And then I looked a little bit harder, and we noticed in our kitchen where it actually bumps out. Actually, maybe I could just show you. Oh no, I can't. It doesn't reach. You can actually see where they poorly patched up a circular hole in the wall which was probably one of those big cast iron stoves with the big pipe that came out and went into the wall and exhausted out of the chimney. So I thought that was kind of a cool mystery to find. And then the people who built our kitchen kind of did so a little bit cheaply. And in the back of the sink, they just put the cabinet in front of what was already there. And it's original beadboard. So the bottom of the kitchen would have been beadboard. And we have two different kinds of subway tile. And one is a very old grout and one's a new grout. So it could have been beadboard with tile. So it was kind of cool to kind of see those layers come out.
Mm-hmm. We have one of those chimneys to nowhere too.
So it might have been the same. Was it in your kitchen, or do you know where it is?
Well, we don't know where it comes out, but it's on the wall where the kitchen is. Yes.
That's awesome.
I have a sorry that I was late, Brittany, but I saw most of it. Thank you. But I have a 1914 house, and has the built-ins, a lot of the wood, and I can see the wood in both of your homes is the natural color. The previous owners painted everything white. I really like it, but it takes away from the authenticity of the age, of the house. But yeah.
What was interesting too is on one of the doors in the house, I saw this sort of like grayish greeny blue kind of left over. So I actually think at one point somebody had come in and maybe, one of those tertiary colors, and where they needed the contrast color on the wall. I think somebody had actually painted the door and maybe restored the door afterwards. So if you peeled back your white, like if you ever find a little piece, you might actually see the different layers of time and the different color schemes throughout the age of the home.
So one of the only things that was, people are always saying, I found this in my attic. I found that. The only thing I have is there was a door in the basement with a really cool old doorknob on it. So it's an old door. We think it might have been between the drawing room and the kitchen at one point, because the one side, the doorknob is much fancier and the other side is much plainer. But we stripped it and we put it on as our back door now. So we're using it again, but we pulled it up out of the basement. But the fellow that we had strip it for us, I have to admit, I did not take on this project myself, because he said 11 coats of paint on it.
Oh, wow.
It was a huge project for him to get all that paint off of there. He said, oh my goodness. And it all behaved differently, different layers, because of course the top layers were more modern paints, which are a little more elastic, and the lower you went, you got into the really old, the lead-based paints and things. And yeah, he said it was a heck of a project. But I think in other places of our house, people have done that, because there's several places on the doors upstairs, the bedroom doors, the trim is painted still, but the doors are wood. But if you look close, there's places where you can, in cracks, see a little bit of paint left here and there. So somebody had stripped all those doors at some point.
Trends all come back around.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in, and I got in bed, so that's why I'm not on video. But thank you so much. I need to go to bed, but we live in a 1920 half duplex on Washington Street, so that was super informative and kind of explained a lot of the weird stuff that we have in our house. So
awesome. Well,
thank you.
And Susan, so at the beginning of this, Carolyn, do you want to mention to her about the home and garden tour?
Yeah, so the neighborhood association is going to be doing a home and garden tour in September, except we're wanting to make it a little more accessible, a little more inclusive. So to encourage people to participate, the idea being that we're going to put poster boards or like the science fair kind of trifolds in people's yards with a little information about the history of the house, a little bit of whatever kind of interesting tidbits you have, so that people can come by and see that sort of thing without actually tromping through your house. So
Just having the board out front. And
Yeah.
what areas will that include? Will it also include like the country club, the other country club on the other side of the country club, like around the North Lafayette? No.
No, this is what we're gonna. This is the West Wash Park, so this is just gonna be ours. So it's gonna be the Marion to Marion on the east, Broadway on the west, Spear to I-25 will be the boundaries. So we're just kind of putting the word out there. So if people live within those boundaries, we're trying to encourage people to participate. And if people don't live within those boundaries, we just want them to come and visit and see all the fun.
I'm 1 block away, east of I'm on South Lafayette, so yeah, so sorry I can't help by having it, but I can come. I'll definitely
You can come and
Yeah.
walk around. Yes.
One of the cool things she was mentioning, because, you know, we find a lot of people who just don't know where to get started on looking for the history of our home. And we've, you know, been together for a year and a half now. So if there's any volunteers, if somebody's like, can someone see if there's anything cool about my house, that she could send them to anybody who's volunteered to research it for them so that they can help. But my question, Carolyn, so are you guys going to be putting together the poster board, or is that something that like each homeowner should do?
You know, well, it depends, I suppose, on yeah, if we have 20 houses, I don't want to make 20 poster boards up. That's a lot. But, you know, I would kind of like, as much as we can, people to do their own, because then it kind of is their own personal thing. That, you know, it's their personality now about their house. But that being said, I'm happy to help anybody, you know?
Yeah, because I think that'll be a big one. Because I think some people would be like, I don't want an art project. So you might get some requests of people like, can you just do this for me?
It's one of those things. If somebody has the research and prints out the stuff, I'm really good with glue. Just
That's awesome. And so what you're saying is, like, if you have any friends that, you know, are in the area and they found out something cool about their house, or they live in just like a really beautiful house in the area, to encourage them to participate, or to even just walk around and see it. I think it's cool because, you know, even though it's just a working class area, we have so many amazing people that started out here and like helped build Denver, and it's awesome.
yeah. And besides we're not calling it net. We're trying to figure out a different way to phrase it rather than home and garden, because we want to include buildings that aren't just homes. We want, especially since we're doing it from the on the outside, so people don't have to clean and have people tromping through their places. We're trying to see if we can get maybe some of the older buildings, the older businesses, or the older apartment buildings, or the duplexes and triplexes. You know, that actually, Brittany, that guy, the guy who gave the talk about the church.
Oh, Dustin.
Yeah.
I thought you were just reading my mind actually about the owner of the 76 Lincoln property. He actually owns the Fleming Brothers building. Do you remember about the Fleming Brothers?
No.
So the Fleming brothers basically built this neighborhood. So they had a lumber yard right on Broadway, and behind the building that he owns was the lumber yard. And then they made so much money supplying the lumber that they were able to open up their own bank and provided mortgages, like the first sort of concept of mortgages. And so the reason why there's so many, cute single family homes and why, so many people got their start here is because they were able to buy the homes basically on credit through their bank.
Oh.
So, and he's super big into history. He tried to get that building historically designated, but because there was some flaw in the original railing that they denied him, and he was like,
Huh.
and so he has a ton of information. So I think he might, I can reach out to him to see if he maybe wants to do it. I can reach out to Dustin to see if, he would put something out about the church or something, or if he knows anything else.
And that's what, even if people, let's say somebody's an introvert and doesn't necessarily, we can I'm already volunteering my spouse to go and stand with, if somebody's an introvert and you just want somebody to stand with you and take on the world, he would be happy to. That's kind of, we just want to make it easy for everybody to participate as much as they can. And like the church and the Fleming Brothers building, if we could get somebody to talk about the school, or that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, because there's a Montessori school room in the basement that has all these paintings in it, and it was the old I guess, what do you call it, custodian engineer, and he lived in the school, and he was the one that kept all the fires going to keep it warm at night and so he lived there, and during his time he just painted these incredible murals all over the school.
That is amazing.
So hopefully maybe the principal can help with the tour, but I think it'd be cool also if people just leave it. September is nice enough, if people just leave them up for more than just the day, so people can walk by and see the pictures too. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of people find it by accident, out walking their dogs or whatever.
Yeah. Can I ask, can I get back to, I have a comment about, I think it was one of the 1910 or the 1920 pictures. There was 7 children it was the mom and dad and 7 children. I just, my house, I moved to a little bit larger bungalow in last January. But my house before was so tiny, and to think of having like 7 children and was just amazing. Okay, that one. Do you think they lived in a bungalow, or do you think they lived in something larger? Where did people sleep in these little tiny houses?
And they share rooms a lot of times too.
They had to have
share beds.
It must have
been. I know at one point in our house, we've got 3 bedrooms, and at one point it was the husband, wife, a daughter, 2 sons, and her mother all living here in the 3 bedrooms.
It was a husband, wife, okay, then 2 sons, and then the husband's mother. So the 2
and
sons,
a daughter, 2 sons, what? A daughter, 2 sons, a daughter, and the mother-in-law.
Oh, so the mother-in-law must have been sleeping with the daughter, do you think?
That's what I figured. Must have, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously people did not have like any possessions, any stuffed animals, the kids didn't have stuffed animals, or probably no books, they maybe just borrowed the books from the library. But anyway, I remember when you did this presentation before, but it was equally good this time. Thank you.